It is a wine legend that goes back centuries and survived kings, wars, and communism. Its wine was served to the rich and famous at lavish feasts, and its vineyards were classified before most of today's well-known wine-growing regions were even fully developed. Tokaj is a special place, but most people have never been there, so I decided to take all of you to this mythical place where some of the best sweet wines in the world are made. On this trip, I had an eye-opening experience tasting the sweetest grape juice I've ever tasted, harvesting grapes berry by berry, and talking to the people who've spent their life perfecting this centuries-old craft. Let's go. Tokaj's wine history goes back to at least the 11th century, and at its peak it was one of the most desirable wines in the world. Louis XIV called it the wine of kings, the king of wine. In 1737 it was demarcated as an official growing region, as one of the first in the world, and when the Soviet Union fell apart, Hugh Johnson, the godfather of wine, decided to set up a winery there instead of anywhere else in the world. So what makes the wines from Tokaj so special? I asked myself that question, and in collaboration with Wines of Hungary, I decided to answer it. Tokaj is located in northeastern Hungary, 2.5 hours away from Budapest, the country's capital. The vineyards of Tokaj cover the foothills of the Zemplén Mountains, and the region is located where the rivers Bodrog and Tisza meet. The rivers bring humidity into the region, creating the ideal growing conditions for botrytis, the fungus that is required for the production of Tokaj's most famous wine. Apart from that, the climate here is overall hot in summer and cold in winter, a classic continental climate. The region experienced a lot of volcanic activity millions of years ago, so the soils today contain a vast range of different volcanic materials, especially around the town of Mart. Less, the light soil type that consists of wind-blown materials, is dominant in many other vineyards. When it comes to grape varieties, the most important one by far is Furmint, as it covers 2/3 of all of the vineyards, and it is well known for producing high acid wines, and the berries can contain a lot of sugar. Furmint sweet wines therefore usually have a great balance between juicy sweetness and acidic freshness, and the dry wines are usually really lively. The grape variety has some similarities with Riesling, but Furmint tends to be less aromatic, and when it's made as a dry wine, it contains more alcohol usually. The second most important grape variety is Haslevelu, which covers 19% of all of the vineyards. Its name means linden-leaved because the leaves of the vine look kind of similar to the leaves of the linden tree. Its wine tends to be a little more mellow, a little rounder in texture and more aromatic compared to Furmint. The third most important grape variety, covering 9% of the vineyards, is Saga Muscatali, a grape variety that is really well known outside of Hungary under the name Muscat à petit grain. While the region is famous for the production of Aszu sweet wines, wines made from botrytized berries, it actually produces a bigger range of styles, from dry to off-dry to sweet to very sweet. They make some fascinating wine styles like dry Samarotny, which is made using botrytized berries but also healthy grapes, fermenting them together and then storing them in barrel for a long time, oftentimes under a floor layer, to produce a style that is kind of similar to vin jaune from Jura. The most unique wine style, however, is Aszu. Its history goes back more than 450 years, and Aszu winemaking in Tokaj was first mentioned in writing in 1571. The two rivers I mentioned earlier, the Tisza and the Bodrog, play an important role here. They meet nearby, and as they have slightly different temperatures, fog develops and creeps into the vineyards. That fog is later during the day pushed out by winds coming in from Poland, which creates ideal conditions for botrytis to develop. The botrytis fungus grows on the berries, causing them to lose water and shrivel. The sugar is therefore being concentrated, polyphenols increase, and the flavor changes. These Aszu berries are harvested one by hand. A worker must pick at least 6 kilograms in order to be economically viable. know, an average worker harvests 7 to 8 kilograms per day, and top workers can harvest up to 12 kilograms per day, but that's a tiny amount if you compare it to a normal grape harvest. When I heard that, I decided that it cannot be that difficult and tried it myself at Tokaj Aszú. I'm going to give myself 5 minutes and pick some Aszu berries, and let's see how many I can pick in that time. Let's go. I've harvested grapes before, but this is something else. In addition to the back-breaking labor of getting the berries out of the vineyards, you also have to be really patient trying to find the right berries and harvesting them one by one from the vine. I already understand why they are using gloves, because my fingers are already getting sticky. Hungry flies attack you, and those slippery little berries fall off the bunch if you're not careful. The workers go into the vineyards several times as they can only harvest the fully shriveled berries. This is a whole bunch of Aszu berries. That's amazing. So the berries are not supposed to, like when they drip like this is not, they are not ready. They're not quite ready. They need to be like jelly inside. So they need to be squishy, but there's not supposed to be any juice coming out. Okay, time's up. This is 5 minutes of work. And I was really lucky because there was this one bunch that had lots of Aszu berries. So this is tough. I'm still learning.
Yeah, 5 minutes, then this amount 12 times per hour. This is like 6 kilos per day. It's 2 buckets per day.
6 kilos per day, you would say. So,
Yeah.
so that's at the very low end of what you would
But
still accept.
it's already rentable.
But also the rest of the process is very different. In the winery, the Aszu berries cannot be pressed. Instead, they are being soaked for 16 to 36 hours, either in must, fermenting wine, or in wine that has already completed fermentation. If you would try to press them as you press normal grapes, they would just form a paste and nothing would come out of the press. These Aszu berries are stored sometimes for months in open-top vats, and as they sit there, a thick syrup starts trickling out at the bottom. It is just squeezed out gently by the weight of the other berries using good old gravity. It was my first time tasting this juice, and it was so thick that you could almost eat it with a fork. If you ferment this super concentrated juice, which is usually done in glass balloons and can take a long time as yeasts really struggle at that sweetness level, you get Essentia. Essentia is a super concentrated wine with sugar levels above 450 grams per liter, very low alcohol levels, and traditionally it's consumed using a spoon. 100 kilograms of Aszu berries can yield a maximum of 6 liters of Essentia, which is completely crazy, and that's also the reason why this wine tends to be very expensive. One of the most expensive bottles of wine in the world is a magnum of the 2008 Royal Tokaj Essentia, which reportedly sold for tens of thousands of dollars, and I got to see it in all its glory on my visit. I didn't get to taste it though. But back to the production of Aszu. The traditional measure of sweetness for Aszu wines was the number of buckets filled with Aszu berries, the so-called Puttonyos, that were added to a 136 liter Gönchi barrel filled with wine. There was a time when 3 and 4 Puttonyos wines were also being made, but in 2013 the regulations changed, and since then they only allowed 5 Puttonyos and 6 Puttonyos. The new classification is also not based on the number of Puttonyos. Instead, it's based on the residual sugar in the wine. A 5 Puttonyos wine has to contain at least 120 grams per liter of residual sugar and needs to be aged for 18 months in barrel. A 6 Puttonyos wine has to contain at least 150 grams per liter. Tokaj Aszú wine comes in this very distinctive bottle. The most common one is 0.5 liters in size, but they also come in 0.375, 0.25, 0.1875 and 0.1 liter bottles. The dry wines are usually bottled in 0.75 liter bottles that come in the same shape but are made from colored glass, and I really like this shape. It looks pretty cool. They also recently released their Aszú Glass, which is made from very fine material. It's kind of sleek and elegant, and it has this small bowl that really allows you to get very close to the wine in order to properly taste it. Aszú wine usually has a really golden color. This is more light golden. They can also be really brown, almost amber in color, and really thick. So you can already see the concentration just by looking at the wine. Even though Firmint is not an aromatic grape variety, Aszú wines tend to be really rich and concentrated due to the intensity of the wine and the work of botrytis. This smells of apricot, pineapple. You also get some flavors of fig, a little bit of raisin character, and there's also a little bit of vanilla aroma coming from the glass. So it's really complex and really thick and rich. On the palate, this is really intense with lots of sweetness, at least 150 grams per liter, as this is a 6 Puttonyos. But it also has this beautiful freshness, the acidity that cuts through the sweetness and makes this wine taste really balanced. You also have this grippiness, the phenolics that come from the botrytis infection. And that just makes this really, well, really a sensory experience. You know, my tongue has a lot to process right now. The finish with those wines is usually very long. It just lingers on. Delicious. Even though the winemaking process is very important, it's also important to know where the grapes were grown. And this is why the people in the region actually decided to classify their vineyards into first, second, and third grows in the 18th century, long before any other region really thought of anything like that. Walking through Tokaj, you see big differences in terms of the exposition, the soil type, and the altitude of different vineyards. And it therefore makes a lot of sense that they would yield different wine qualities. And wineries nowadays bottle more and more wines separating out their different plots. At Royal Tokaj, I walked through their famous cruise St. Tomasz that produces some of their best wines. The soil here is volcanic in origin, and it's really red because of oxidized iron, and I had to take a soil sample from there for my collection. I also talked to István Csepsi. His winery is one of the most well-known family-run estates in Tokaj, and his family is credited for producing the first Aszu wine, but today they also produce a lot of dry wines. He explained that vineyards that are not great for the production of sweet wines can be great for dry wines. They just have different requirements when it comes to the exposition and the ventilation compared to vineyards that are supposed to produce botrytis Aszu berries. Vineyards on top of the slopes usually don't get a lot of botrytis and can therefore be excellent for the production of dry whites. There's another important element that adds to the terroir of the region, and it is their amazing cellars. They were dug into the ground centuries ago, and they are today used for the aging of the wine in barrel and in bottle. At the state-owned winery Grand Tokaj, their cellars stretch far and wide, and I sometimes felt like walking through the mines of Moria in some of those caves. Most cellars are covered in mold, and in some areas booger-like slime comes down from the ceiling, and I find that absolutely fascinating. Wineries are proud of the quality of their mold, as it indicates that storage conditions are humid enough for the aging of wine. The mold doesn't smell, and for some reason wine and mold form some deep underground bond. The bottled wine is also aged in those cellars, oftentimes covered with mold as well, which raises the question, how well does Tokaj age in bottle? The answer is very well. I tasted some Tokajs going back to the 1940s, and while the wines changed, they got more brownish in color and smelled more of caramel and honey. They still kept it together very nicely, showing that Tokaj can age gracefully. On top of that, we don't really know how well the wines will age that are being produced right now. The 20th century was quite difficult for the region, with wars disrupting everything in the first half of the century. And then under Soviet times, the focus was more on quantity rather than quality. It's also interesting to see wineries like Sauska experimenting with sparkling wines and alternative grape varieties in their state-of-the-art winery, which looks like a UFO just landed in a vineyard. It's also interesting to see how well these wines match with food. The sweet wines can obviously be matched with desserts and cheese, but they also pair really well with goose liver, which is a local speciality, and stuff like lacquered pork belly, which worked beautifully. The dry ferments can be delicious with creamy meals and white fish. Overall, Tokaj is a fascinating place with a lot of history, but it also feels like the region is still developing as they are focusing more on single vineyards and developing their dry ferments. The legend of Tokaj lives as this is a beautiful region with a lot of character. Its wines are unique, and I'm glad that I understand them a little bit better now, but that's what wine travel gives you, a deeper understanding of different places. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, then please like it down here. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. My question of the day is, what are your thoughts of Tokaj? Let me know down below in the comments. But whatever you do, stay thirsty.